Well, hello everyone, and today is Tara Day, and I'm delighted and honored to welcome a woman who really needs no introduction within the world of Tibetan Buddhism, Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo. Jetsunma's activities are hard to describe in a few words, as she is like an emanation of noble Tara or Vajrayogini in human form, yet I will try. One of the first Western fully ordained Buddhist nuns in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, Jesama has pioneered by action and example the empowerment and recognition of the great capacities and potential of female practitioners and nuns, not only by spending 12 years in retreat in an isolated cave in the snow, but also from her founding and leading an extremely beautiful and thriving Dongyu Gyatso Ling nunnery in Himachal Pradesh, India. In addition, her accessible, relevant, lively, passionate, and honest teachings and love of the Buddha Dharma. Jesima is also a passionate advocate against ethical misconduct and female inequality in Buddhist cultural traditions, but also an animal lover who practices what she preaches with a vegetarian diet. Turning 80 years old this year, Jetsama is still going strong in terms of Dharma activities, giving teachings, attending Buddhist conferences, and going on Buddhist pilgrimages, as well as kindly and graciously agreeing to our interview today. So without further ado, welcome Jetsama Tenzin Palmo to Dakini Conversations.
Thank you, Adele. Thank you. Your over-generous introduction, but we'll overlook that one.
Well, I don't think so. Some may say it was under-generous considering, but anyway. So first of all, let us turn to your life, your background, first of all. Many people will already be aware of your background, but some may not. So perhaps you could discuss a little bit about your life in the UK, where you came from, your family, and sort of social background.
Well, I was brought up in East London. My father had been a fishmonger, but he died when I was 2. So he's sort of out of the picture. So my mother brought up my brother and myself alone. So I always had a very feminine upbringing, really, because everything was decided by my mother. And I had always been interested. I believe that from a very young age, I believed that we were inherently perfect, but somehow we had lost sight of our true nature. And so we had to keep coming back again and again until we discovered who we really were. So my question always throughout my childhood was, what is perfection? How do we attain it? And since most of the religions were based on the idea of an external creator God that we had to worship, and I didn't believe in that, it left me thinking I had to find my own path. But when I was 18, then I discovered Buddhism, and I was so grateful to the Buddha, because not only did he explain, how we could evolve, but he showed the path to that. He didn't just say, this is how it is, but he showed us how we ourselves could practice and realize the profound truths which he was revealing to us. So I was very, very grateful. Then somehow I got into Tibetan Buddhism, goodness knows how. And when I was 20, I came to India.
Okay, so if we could just go back a little bit there with how you first came into contact with Buddhism and the Buddha, as you said. So I heard that was through a library book that you read. Is that right?
Yes. It was a book. I worked in the library, and somebody brought in a book called The Mind Unshaken. And I liked the title very much, so I took it and read it. And when I read it, I recognized I already knew this, that actually I was a Buddhist. I hadn't realized that before. So yeah, I was very grateful. It was a very simple book on Buddhism in Thailand, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the Three Signs of Being. Very, very simple. It wasn't Madhyamaka or anything, which, it was very, very clear, very nicely written. And I was very, very grateful to that book, actually. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Now, you say you then traveled to India at the age of 20. So, what was the reason for that? And how did your family or your mother, as you say, it was very feminine household, female household. How did she react when you did that?
Well, I came to India because I was looking for my teacher, who I knew was in India. I mean, various lamas who were already in Britain at that time had just come, like Chugam Trungpa Rinpoche, etc., said to me, you know, I'm not your teacher's in India. And I mean, I knew that that was true. I just had to go and find him. When I told my mother that I was going to India, she said, how are you, dear? And when are you leaving? She was terrific. She never said, how can you leave your poor mother? Here I am going to be all by myself. You know, what kind of a grateful daughter are you? She just said, you know, well, when are you going? So she, all the way through, she was very, very supportive. And actually, a year after I was in India, she also came to India and stayed for many months.
Ah, okay. Now, as a foreigner traveling to India, I guess at that time wasn't so sort of maybe the resources that we have nowadays, for example, not so easy. So what were some of the challenges you found when you first went there as a British woman abroad in India?
Well, I don't know. India in those days was much more simple. You know, I mean, I traveled to India by boat for a start. And you know, in that time there were almost no cars. And everywhere you went, you know, within reason, you had to walk. There was no television. There was no, of course, no computers and internet and all that. So it was a very much more simple kind of environment. But I loved it. I mean, I was staying in the hill station called Dalhousie and working in a school for young incarnate lamas called the Young Lamas Home School, and I was staying in the nunnery, which was the predecessor of the nunnery in Tillapur, and I just loved it. I mean, I felt completely at home there. But it was a very much more simple world than what it is nowadays, and people also had much more simple lifestyles than they have nowadays. Everything's changing, you know.
So there wasn't this kind of five-star hotels sort of facilities.
Nothing like that.
And you say you went on the boat. Why did you go on the boat? Was there a particular reason for that to India?
It was cheapest. It only cost about £80. And it was one of these cargo ships, which just took a few passengers. It was nice, actually, because, you know, you leave England and then you go variously to various ports till you get to Mumbai. It was like a bardo stay until you get to your new life.
And when you arrived in India, did you speak any of the Hindi language or Tibetan? Or, I mean, how difficult was it with the language and the culture to start with?
Well, no, of course I didn't speak Hindi. I still don't. But many Indians speak English. I mean, due to the British Raj. And I had been studying, I had gone to work in the library of the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, in London. So I could read Tibetan, although I couldn't actually speak it.
Yes. And
but you know, India is actually an easy place to live, I think. People, you know, they come to India and they feel quite at home here. Yes. And it's a very quality to life in India. Even then, you know, it's, you know, so it wasn't difficult. Yes. And Indians are very friendly people, you know, very kind and good-hearted.
Definitely, yeah, definitely agree with that. Love India very much. Now, so when did you first took refuge, and your decision to become a nun was in 1964. So your first ordination vows, as far as I'm aware, were with the 16th Karmapa. Is that correct?
No, my first vows were with the Khamsa Rinpoche.
Ah, okay. So perhaps you could talk about that a little bit. Yeah, how that came to be.
Well, I mean, I was, as I said, I went to India because I wanted to meet my teacher. And then this school for incarnate lamas for tulkus, was run by an extraordinary British woman called Frida Beatty, Sister Palmer. And one time I was her secretary, and we received this letter from this community, this Tibetan community, wanting us to sell Tibetan paper. And it was signed by Kamtu Rinpoche. So just hearing that name, faith arose. And I asked Frida, who is Kamtu Rinpoche? And she said, oh, he's a very high Kagyu Lama. Oh, he's the Lama we're waiting for, she said. We had rented a house for him to come. And so then I said, well, you know, I can take refuge with him. And she said, yes, yes, very high Lama. So we waited through May and he didn't come. And then we waited through June and he didn't come. And then on the very last day of June, which was my 21st birthday, Frida got a call and she put the phone down and said, well, your best birthday present has just arrived down at the bus station. Kamtu Rinpoche is here. So it was indeed my very, very best birthday present ever.
Oh, wow.
So I asked him if I could take refuge and he said, of course. And then I went to work sort of as his secretary. Frida said, go and work with him so you get to know each other. And then I said, I want to be a nun. And he said, yes, of course. And so then I went with him back to his own community and took the Rapjung vows, the going forth vows from at that time.
Okay.
3 weeks after I met him.
Wow. So what was it that, you know, you just knew you wanted to be a nun at that time?
I had
What
always
was the
wanted
reason
to
for
be a
that?
nun. Since I was a small child, I had always wanted to be a nun. And when people said to me, what are you going to do when you grow up? I would say, I'm going to be a nun. And at that time, of course, I couldn't understand why, since I wasn't really Christian. But I knew I was going to be a nun. And voila, here we are.
Yeah, amazing. So I guess there seems to be maybe a very strong past life connection there, perhaps. Do you feel like you were perhaps a nun in a previous life as well, with the same
I think I was a monk in a previous life.
Monk. Okay.
I was always a bit puzzled by my body when I was a little girl. What kind of body is this, you know?
Yeah.
And Kamtu Rinpoche also said to me one time that in previous lives, he could keep me close to him, but in this life, as I was a female, it was more difficult.
Ah, how interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when did you take the novice ordination vows, and who was that with? It says, and it also says you took full ordination in 1973. So perhaps you could talk us through that a little bit.
Okay, well, at one point in 67, so I took my first vows in 64. Then in 67, I got a letter from Frida Beatty saying, Karmapa says you should take Getzel ordination and the novice ordination. So at that time, Kamtu Rinpoche hadn't taken full ordination, the requisite 10 years. So he couldn't give the ordination. So then I asked him if I could go to Sikkim. And he said, yes, of course, go to Sikkim. So I went and I met the Karmapa there and said I wanted to take the Getzel ordination. And he said, well, why don't you take it from your own Lama? And I said he hadn't been a monk long enough.
Oh, okay.
And so then he said, okay, of course, you know. So then he gave the ordination in Rumtek.
Wow. Okay.
And
so how was that, meeting the 16th Karmapa? A lot of people,
I had met him before. I had met him before on a number of occasions. So he knew me. And also he'd come to Dalai Lama. He was a friend to Kamtu Rinpoche.
Right.
So yeah, he knew me already. But when he wrote and said you should take Getzel, he assumed I would get it from Kamtu Rinpoche. He hadn't intended that I would go to Sikkim and take it from him.
Okay.
But it was fine. I mean, he gave the ordination. And then Frida in 72 went to Hong Kong and took full ordination, Bhikshuni ordination in the Chinese tradition. And then she wrote me and said, you know, you can get this ordination in Hong Kong. So then the next year I did that. In 73, I went to Hong Kong and took full ordination there.
All right. And why did you do that? Because we'll go on and talk a little bit more about the whole bhikkhuni full ordination issue a bit later. But for you personally, why was that important to you to do that?
Well, when I took the Getzel ordination from the Karmapa, my feeling was, great rejoicing to take the ordination from the Karmapa, but sadness that that was as far as we could go. It was only a novice ordination. We hadn't actually become part of the Fourfold Sangha because we were not actually fully ordained, just half ordained.
Mm.
Like you're
Yes,
standing in the doorway, but you've not entered into the palace.
exactly. And so other women, were they there with you as well? I mean, you mentioned Freda Bedi had done it, but is there anyone else who did that with you at that time?
Not at that time. But later, some Tibetan nuns did go and take ordination. But of course, the problem was when they went back, who was senior, right? These younger nuns who had taken full ordination, or the old nuns who had not taken full ordination and only had novice ordination. Plus, there were never 5 of them so that they could do the confession rituals twice a month. There was usually 2 of them or 3 of them, and that's not enough to make a sangha. So
Right.
basically, they just disappeared back into the woodwork and didn't even mention. I mean, you get nuns coming up and saying, actually, I'm a Geloma. But it's almost like, keep it a secret, don't tell anyone,
Really? Wow. I mean, how easy has it been for you to keep that Vinaya as the Gelongma?
Well, I mean, like the Tibetans are pretty casual. And I said to come to Rinpoche, look, some of these rules really I'll never be able to keep. And he said, remember, this was done 2,500 years ago. And some of the rules are important, some of them are irrelevant. And you just make your own discrimination as to what you're keeping and not keeping. So most of them, if you're living in a well-ordered nunnery, keep themselves.
Yes,
right?
yes, exactly. So you also mentioned that you spent some time actually living in a male monastery. Is that right? That you
No,
spent
I didn't live in a monastery. I lived with the lay people. And
Okay.
for 2 years, I lived with the Togdens, with our yogis, which was lovely.
Wonderful. Yeah. Now, how was it then with the Togdens? And also, I mean, we'll talk a bit later about the Togdenma tradition, which you're reviving. But, this whole idea of the inferior form of a woman, which is often spoken about, unfortunately, in Buddhist circles, even now, how was that sort of dealt with when you were interacting with the male practitioners like that?
Well, I mean, one thing is our monks are really nice. They're really very friendly and kind. It's not that they were putting me down. It's just, well, what a shame that you're not a boy, so you could join the monastery, right? I mean, and of course the Togdens didn't care one way or the other. I mean, I had my own room, obviously, but they were always very open and friendly and kind, and a great inspiration for the Dharma practice, actually. So I was very fortunate that Rinpoche allowed me to live for 2 years with them.
Wow. And so did they teach you as well some of their sort of practices?
Well, not many of the advanced practices, but I was doing things like Mundro and Vajrayogini and this type of practices.
Wow. So now in 1976, it says you started a retreat, or you wanted to do a retreat in a cave in Lahore, India. And that went on for 12 years. And this is also the subject of your very famous and best-selling book, Cave in the Snow, which I would highly recommend to anyone who hasn't read that yet. It's very inspiring indeed. So can we just talk about that a little bit? What was your reason for doing that? Were you told to do it, for example, or?
Okay, so Kamta Rinpoche's community, which is the lay community and the monastery, moved from Dalhousie to land in another part of Himachal Pradesh, where they set up a community which is now called Tashijong. So I was around there for a little while, but then Kamta Rinpoche said, really, it's time you went away and practiced. So I said, how about Nepal? And he said, Nepal, they're not so good. You go back to Lahore. And I had visited Lahore and stayed in retreat in Lahore several years before. So he said, go back to Lahore. And then a few days later, I got a letter from a Lahori friend who said, why don't you come back to Lahore? I will find you a quiet monastery where you can stay. So since these two things came together within a few days, I left and went to Lahore and lived for about 6 years in a monastery there called Tayo Gompa, which was wonderful. The monasteries in Lahore have both monks and nuns. They all have separate houses, but they come together for pujas and things, rituals. So I lived there for about 6 years, and it was really very, very nice. But in the winter, which was when I was usually wanting to be in retreat, is when everybody came into the monastery, all the monks and nuns. So it wasn't exactly quiet because people would sit up on their flat roofs and have long conversations across the roofs. And the first year when I was there, they said, you know, to get ready for the winter, I would need to buy 20 cups. And I said, why do I need 20 cups? And they said, because we all go from different households, you know, having tea parties. So when we come to you, you need to be ready with your 20 cups. So I said, actually, I'm going to be in retreat during winter. Sorry, no tea parties.
Okay. So not that easy for someone who likes their privacy and private space then.
Well, they were very lovely. I really loved all the monks and nuns in Thailand. They were very kind and good-hearted, but it was not actually the ideal place for doing retreat. Mm. But anyway, I mean, to cut a long story short, eventually I heard about this. Well, the next day I heard about a cave.
Right.
And, yes. And so then we all went to have a look at the cave. And they were very concerned about me living such a remote place all by myself. But anyway, I wrote to come to Rinpoche for his permission. And basically he said, well, if it's dry and it faces south, then it's okay. So we got someone to build up. It was like an overhang. So we got someone to build up the wall with doors and windows. And it's still there.
Oh, really? Have you been back? Have you been back there to see it, or?
I have been. I was a few years ago. I went back. Now it's too much. I can't walk that like that anymore. But other friends have, and one American nun lives there in the summer at least. So it was a perfect place because once it snowed, then nobody could come, and there was a water source not far from there, and. You know, Lahul is in Tibetan is called Kashakandroling. Lahul, the land of the Dakinis.
Yeah.
And it really felt like there was a very strong, benign Dakini energy there to help, you know. So it was a perfect place for a retreat, actually.
I'm sure. So you mentioned about getting up there. So was that quite difficult then? So, you know, how long does it take to walk there?
Well, I've just been reading our nuns write essays, which we publish in our newsletter. And a lot of the essays they've been writing, I've just been reading now, are about the whole group of nuns went up to the cave. And because they wanted to see it. So they went to Lahul and they walked up to the cave. And they're all complaining about how difficult it was to get up there.
Oh, right. Okay.
They're Himalayan girls. Come on, girls, you know, but they were saying it was very difficult and there was no path. Actually, from the monastery, from the Tayo Gompa, it was about an hour and a half. It wasn't that difficult.
But it's not a kind of a straight path. It's like sort of a bit kind of rocky, is it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, that you have to make the path really, and then you go across scree and all sorts of things. So,
yes,
you know, but you know, you get used to everything.
Exactly. And yeah, I'm sure all of these things really make one more tolerant and patient, right? And like you say, you know, it's not so these days things are kind of a lot easier sometimes, even in terms of long retreats, right? So anyway, so then you did a complete isolation in the cave. So how was that? And what was one of the biggest challenges you faced during that time? You sort of you got snowed in and things like that. Was that?
Yeah, I mean, as the whole 12 years I wasn't in retreat. I
Yeah.
mean, during that time, I had attended 3 months of the Sakya Lamdre, and then one winter I went to Nepal and so forth. So I wasn't really actually in retreat for 12 years.
Mm.
It was only the last 3 years I was in strict retreat and didn't come out. Mostly in the summer, one was open to, and I had to grow vegetables and things like that also for the winter, right? The main point was the winter was from about November to May. So it was a very nice time when, although it's snowing, it was nonetheless very quiet and very isolated and nobody could come. So for retreats, it was ideal actually. And I didn't really see it as being difficult. Everybody says, oh, but it really wasn't like that.
Yeah.
I mean, occasionally I would think, all right, if you could be anywhere in the world, where would you want to be? And I couldn't think of anywhere else I would want to be. I mean, it was ideal, actually. I mean, there were problems and difficulties and snow, and it got very wet in the spring. But so what? The compensations were so much greater than the difficulties that, who cared?
I mean, were there any times that you did feel sort of afraid or frightened or thought you might die, or was it all sort of you never felt that? Was it?
Well, the only time I thought I was going to die was when there was a blizzard for a week, and then the whole cave got covered, and opened the door, and there was just a wall of ice. And I assumed, because the cave was small, that I would soon run out of oxygen and suffocate. And so I thought, okay, well, the Lama is there. So I prayed very hard to Rinpoche, and I put all my little pills that you're supposed to take at the time of death. Okay. And I prayed to Rinpoche to take care of me in the bardo. And then I heard Rinpoche's voice inside me kind of saying, tunnel out. So, all right, Rinpoche. So then I got a saucepan lid and it took hours to get a tunnel up. Then I saw it was still blizzarding. So then I crawled back in again, waited for a few days. But I wasn't worried, which is interesting. I just thought, okay, well, the Tibetans have a saying, nana naji naji. If you're sick, you're sick. If you die, you die. So
wonderful, yeah.
And that's how your mind gets into that kind of mind space, where whatever happens is just what's happening, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and before we sort of finish with this, the retreat in the cave, so what would you say was your biggest takeaway then, or sort of, realization, if you like, of being in retreat during that time, so that when you came out, what would you say was the sort of biggest kind of lesson, or that you got from that?
I think it is that we can be, if we make friends with ourselves, and we don't really, that's all the company we need. And when we're with others, we're with others. But when we're with ourselves, we are also, in a way, with our best friend. Yeah,
exactly. With the Buddha nature, with the sort of deity within, right? That's always present, like Tara, as you have behind you. Is that a white Tara tanker there? I can see.
Yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful, absolutely stunning. And when we talk about your nunnery as well, the paintings in the in your nunnery in Himachal Pradesh are absolutely stunning as well. So you came out of retreat then in 1988, and you mentioned that was due to some visa issues. But were you ready then? Did you feel like, okay, it's time to go into sort of the worldly, more mundane sort of life? Or did you see it just as a natural progression?
Well, I mean, obviously, I had thought I still had a few more months left for my retreat. I'd done 3 years, but I hadn't done 3 months.
Mm.
And the arrival of this very exhausted police officer on my doorstep, telling me that the superintendent of police said that my visa was illegal for the last 3 years and come down next day to explain why I was still here was a kind of bit of a surprise. But fortunately, I had been doing yoga for those 3 years. And as a result, I could actually walk down all the way to Keelong. And I was feeling fine. My body was really in good shape.
Amazing.
Which was just as well, because otherwise my legs would have collapsed walking all the way down the mountain and then walking the 5 kilometers to Keelong.
Yeah.
So, anyway, it was all a misunderstanding.
Oh, it was a misunderstanding.
Yeah, I was a new SP. I hadn't recognized that actually my visa had been automatically renewed by the old SP. So, but I mean, that was the end of the retreat. I mean, I was out of retreat.
Wow. Okay. So at that time then, you started to teach, was it? And I mean, what was the sort of motivation to start teaching? And also, let's talk about founding and leading one of the most beautiful and successful nunneries, I would say, in Himachal Pradesh, which is the Dongyu Gyatso Ling Nunnery. So, what was the sort of motivation?
Later, because a friend of mine who was a long-time devotee of Anandamayi, a Hindu guru, he wrote me and said, okay, we've found it, the perfect place. We're in Assisi. Come to Assisi. And I had just been reading Dante's Divine Comedy. So I'm thinking that I needed to reconnect with Western culture, which I had completely abandoned from the age of 18. And so when he said, come to Italy, I thought, well, that's the perfect place, you know. So then I met him and we did a pilgrimage in South India. And then he and his wife and myself, we went to Italy and stayed in the hills behind Assisi, which of course is sacred to St. Francis. And I mean, Italy is a joy if you're interested in Western culture, because I mean, everything is there, especially the art. And so I stayed there in Italy for about 5 or 6 years. Then I was trying to go back into retreat, but every time something really major happened that I couldn't do the retreat. I mean, to the point that I said to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, okay, you don't want me in retreat. What do you want me to do now? My life has been to you. What do you want?
Yes.
And then the answer came, go back to India. So then I went back to India and started teaching English to the incarnation of my Lama Kamta Rinpoche, who was at that time 12 years old. And then there was a meeting of all the big Drukpa Kagyu Lamas. And during that time, they said, okay, we don't have anything for women. We want you to start a nunnery. And so I thought, yes, that's what I have to do. The previous Kamtrul had often said, I would like you to start a nunnery. I had no idea how do you start a nunnery. I'd never lived in one. And I had no money. I wasn't a Tibetan. I wasn't a Lama. How do you even begin to talk about nunneries or give Dharma talks if nobody invites you to give a Dharma talk, right? So I thought, well, I know I have to start a nunnery. I have not a clue how to begin. And then I looked up and there was a green Tara, Tanka. And I said, okay, lady, you want a nunnery, you do it. I'll be the front person, but behind the scenes, you've got to make it work. This is your nunnery. And so she did. And here we are.
Wow. That's a really beautiful story about Green Tara, and it is such a beautiful nunnery. And just going back a little bit, then you mentioned that your guru had passed away. So when was that? Was that when you were in the I mean, when did that happen? And how
Well,
how was that sort of made you feel? Were you in the retreat or outside of the retreat then? In the
I
cave?
was in Nepal. I was in Nepal.
Right.
And so we heard about it from Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. Rinpoche was only, Kamta Rinpoche was only 48 years old.
Hmm.
So it was a huge shock because, you know, I didn't think he was going to make old bones, but I didn't think he was going to die at the age of 48. And so then, because of that, I could return to Tashijong for the cremation, which was very moving. And then the next incarnation was discovered about a year and a half later. So he came to Tashijong when he was 1.5 years old.
Wow. And how did you feel when he passed away? I mean, you said he was very young. I mean, how did it affect you?
Devastated. It was like being in a huge desert and your guide just left, you know. But, you know, then really one realizes that the real guru is in the heart. You know, it's not just an external person. That, you know, if you have your heart open with devotion, the guru is always there.
Yes, exactly.
And I mean, this I think is really very, very true. And although it's always been very painful on one hand, because I never had that relationship with anybody else. But nonetheless, I know if I need Rinpoche, he's there.
Yes, exactly. So we're talking about your founding of the Dongyo Gyatso Ling Nunnery and the reasons for that. So when you talk about empowering nuns or female practitioners, was that part of the reason why you set up that nunnery, do you think? Was that sort of part of what you were doing there?
Well, as I say, when the Lama said, we don't have anything for women, so we want you to start a nunnery, I figured they were probably right. If I didn't do it, nobody would, at least at that time, within the Drukpa Kagyu. So I felt, right, okay, start a nunnery. And one Lama, Dozon Rinpoche, said something very useful. He said, look, you're very lucky because when we start a monastery, we're always looking back to how it was in Tibet. And the closest we can reproduce to how we did it in Tibet, whether it was good or bad, that is a success for us. But you don't have anything to look back to. You can do anything you want. So look at how monasteries and nunneries are run, and then decide for yourself how you want to run your nunnery. But be careful, because once you get started, it's very difficult to change. So that was very good advice, and permission to be a little bit flexible with how we ran our nunnery. And actually, the main difference was that normally in a traditional monastery, you have a section of monks who do ritual, drupchens. You have a section who do study, and then you have a small little nucleus who might do retreats. And I decided that in Dongyo Gyatso Ling, we would bring all three together. So the nuns would study, but they would also learn ritual, and they would also do practice. And the three should be connected together, not separated. So that's what we've done.
Yes.
So,
and just in terms of the building and the sort of the creation of the nunnery, as I said about the painting inside as well, this amazing temple of all the female lineages and deities. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, what was the inspiration for doing that?
Well, the actual buildings were supposed to be traditional Himachali buildings made of mud brick, stone, and tiled roofs. But of course, now all the Himachali traditional buildings are being pulled down, and they're building up concrete and tin roofs. But anyway, never mind. So that the idea was that it shouldn't be too alien. It should blend in with the landscape. And in our temple, I spoke with the the monk, the Lama who was visualizing it and organizing it, Lama Lodro, and the artist and his apprentices. And I said, I'm very tired of going into nunnery temples where all the images of enlightenment are male. What kind of message does this give to nuns? So to their, really to their credit, they didn't laugh. They didn't say, oh, these Western feminists. They said, mm-hmm. And next thing
Yeah.
I saw them looking in a book on female Buddhas and coming up with all sorts of ideas, which I also didn't have, like 2 walls covered with female monastics, which Lama Lodro looked up in the Kanjur for all their names of the early nuns at the time of the Buddha. And then Milarepa with his female disciples, which also all named, and of course the 21 Taras and so forth. So as much as they could, even with the protectors, they tried to think up as many female protectors as they could. They were very, very obliging. And I give them full credit for their, what they produced, which is very inspiring. And of course, resonates with female empowerment.
Absolutely. I mean, when I walked into it the first time, I was just blown away. I mean, I've never seen anything like it in my life. And I think it must be, if not the only, but certainly the first that's ever been like that. I mean, I'm not aware of any other temple which has that amount of, and just the all on the walls, and it's just incredible. Highly recommended to see it. And so thank you for that. Basically, that's an incredible legacy there. So now let's talk a little bit about the Bhikshunis then. And now you did take the Bhikshuni full ordination, but you've also been keen on reviving that within the tradition and within your own nunnery. So what's some of the challenges or obstacles you faced with that?
Well, the main problem is that at the time in the 8th century, when Guru Padmasambhava and Shankarakshita invited monks into Tibet to start the ordination process, they didn't invite nuns. Even though there were actually a lot of nuns in India at that time, but anyway, somehow or other, as usual, they got overlooked. And so the argument is that since the nuns' ordination, the Bhikshuni ordination was never brought into Tibet, therefore it's broken and it's dead, and we have to wait for Buddha Maitreya to come and revive it.
Yes.
So that is the main obstacle as far as the Tibetans are concerned, that the ordination is dead. But
yes, but okay, go on then.
But if you look in the Vinaya, there are 2 things. One is that if you are a monk and you turn into a woman, then you do not need to receive the Bhikshuni, the nun's ordination, because the monk's ordination, nun's ordination is Nguru Chikpa. They're the same essence. So all you need to do is move into a, right? You don't need to be reordained as a nun, even ordained, same ordination. And so it's not a separate lineage. So it has never been cut off because the monk's lineage is carried on until the present day. And the second thing is that monks, in the absence of fully ordained nuns, I allow you to ordain nuns. So there we are. And that's why the Je Khenpo, who's the head of the monastic order in Bhutan, said, okay, let's stop thinking about it, researching it, and going round and round and round. Let's just do it. So he did, and he ordained 142 nuns in Bhutan as Bhikshuni, as Gelongma. And, whatever anybody says, there they are. And as far as they're concerned, they're Gelongma. And as far as I'm concerned, they're Gelongma too.
Sure. I mean, obviously, some people have said, as for example, the 17th Karmapa taught recently that there are and were fully ordained nuns in Tibet, actually, and that it's not true that they weren't, and there are references to them in the literature. But that's a whole other debate. But one of the things that with the women who are Gelongmas in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, when you spoke to them, and as you said before, is how much support do those women get after becoming Gelongmas? And also, do you sometimes feel that there's still this kind of very much sort of, the male emphasis, we gave the ordations, we're behind all of this. It's all a bit kind of, to some people, it all looks a little bit like, again, sort of patriarchy, look how generous and kind we are, when in actual fact, it's been predominantly women within the tradition who have really pushed for this, right? What's your view on that?
No, I think what we need is the point is that even in a double ordination with nuns and monks giving the ordination, which is how it's set down in the Vinaya, still the actual ordination is given by the monks, not by the nuns. That's according to the Vinaya. So whether or not the nuns, their only role, even in a very traditional ceremony, would be to hand over the robes and ask the awkward questions, certain questions about sexual organs and things like that, which the Buddha felt was not, the embarrassed to ask, and the nuns would be embarrassed if the monks did ask. So the women asked the women. And the questions about the various sexual organs and this type of thing is the only difference between the nun's ordination and the monk's ordination. The actual ordination is exactly the same and is given anyway by the monks.
Okay. Now, some nuns or some women, they say, look, in some ways, we don't care so much about this bhikkhuni thing because we're practitioners. And this is a kind of a thing that we don't want to get too caught up in. But on the other hand, as you said yourself, there's an element where this is important, right? Because it's the fourfold Sangha. Can you say a little bit about that? Why is the bhikkhuni ordination so important within the Buddhist Sangha itself?
Well, because the Buddha, at the time of, his enlightenment, when Mara said, okay, now you're a Buddha, so you can leave. And the Buddha said, no, Mara, first I have to establish the fourfold Sangha. Fourfold Sangha is fully ordained monks, fully ordained nuns, laymen, lay women. He said, when this fourfold Sangha is fully established and all of them are studying and practicing and propagating the Dharma, never said just monks. He always said the fourfold Sangha. When the fourfold Sangha is stable, like a table with four legs, the Dharma then is fully established, and this is a Buddhist country, a middle country. So actually Tibet is only a 3.5 Buddhist country because they don't have a fourfold Sangha. They only have a 3.5 Sangha.
Yes, and also it seems in other countries as well. For example, in Thailand.
Theravadin countries are even worse than Tibet, because at least in Tibet, the monks give novice ordination. In the Theravadin countries, they don't even give that. So the nuns at the most have 8 precepts, and sometimes they accept 10 precepts, but they are not respected as being really part of the Sangha. They have a much harder time. Tibetan nuns compared, I mean, we wear the same robes.
Yes.
And in general, nowadays, as nuns become more educated and more confident, then they are gaining more and more the respect of the lay people and of the monks. And so, it's not so bad in the Tibetan tradition as in the Theravadin.
Well, as you mentioned, the Theravada, and then there's the Mahayana and the Vajrayana. So if we move to the Vajrayana then, now some people might say, this is where, yoginis and the Totdenma tradition, has a sort of kind of a more emphasis in a way, because some people, even myself included, would say that the Vajrayana was never really intended for monastics, actually. And there's that famous statement by Atisha who said that, monastics shouldn't take the second or third empowerments for highest yoga tantra. Now, obviously this is debated, and different traditions have different views of that. But how does the sort of Togdema tradition, which you are also very much key in reviving, how does that interrelate with sort of being a nun, let's say?
Well, I have to say that the most keen people at the moment to take the Bhikshuni ordination next year in Bhutan are all our nuns in retreat, all our would-be Togdemas. They are gung-ho to go. Okay. And last year, the 3 nuns which I took from our nunnery, all the other nuns were a bit nervous about what people would say. The 3 nuns who were really most keen to go were from the retreat center.
Interesting.
And of course, our top dens in Tashijong are fully ordained monks.
Yes. Well, it's debated, obviously, about the whole, I guess it depends on what people are practicing, but certainly there is a view, which is certainly propagated perhaps by, you know, sort of more very monastic traditions like sort of the Gelugpas, but, you know, within sort of more yogic traditions like Kagyu and Nyingma, it's not considered to be totally against monastic Vinaya to practice Vajrayana. So why do you think that, sorry?
Everybody does.
Yeah.
I mean, including the Gelugpa, you know, I mean, they're all teaching highest yoga tantras.
Absolutely. And there's some people are very sort of questioning that, you know, how can you sort of
I mean, even Pema Rinpoche and all these great Nyingma lamas, many of them were monks. The Karmapas are usually monks. You know, I mean, the difference is only that there are the Ngakpa traditions and the monastic traditions, but it's up to you which you choose.
Yes, so there is, I mean, certainly, for example, the 14th Dalai Lama, he says, you know, monastics should not take the 2nd and 3rd empowerment. So he very much goes along.
He gives it.
Yes, Zoom. But he well, absolutely, but he always says that, but then he says, you know, that they shouldn't visualize themselves in union and things like that. So it is a kind of a strange, debatable area, and I think some people feel that, you know, certainly the Indian roots of Vajrayana and Buddhism were very much more with the sort of you know, I mean, people got kicked out of monasteries if they were doing those sorts of practices.
Well, that's because they were physically in union. That's why they got kicked out. But to visualize yourself in union is something different. And well, I mean,
yeah, that's the question.
It's a different thing to having a live consort to visualizing a consort.
Indeed, and that is the question: is how many people are sticking to that? So that's a whole other issue, and maybe that moves on then, in a way, just to briefly consider, you know, is this element where women particularly have felt sort of misused, particularly in Vajrayana, because they felt, you know, that people who were doing it were not really seeing them as kind of for enlightenment or as sort of, you know, doing this for the right motivations, but we're really more doing it for the worldly pleasure and the sort of, and seeing women as kind of objects. So you know, that's why I think, you know, obviously, as you know yourself, there are a lot of women out there who seem very, very annoyed by the whole thing, to put it mildly.
But because there's so much ambiguity, you know, and I mean, if you step over the border from visualization to actualization as a monk, then you have stepped over the border, and that's that. You are no longer a monk. And if you are stating yourself as a monk and you are not a monk, then you are a hypocrite apart from anything else. And one has to question, where is the wisdom there? Where is the compassion? Where's the skillful means? When it ends up with people becoming very confused, very disheartened, disillusioned, disempowered, and sometimes ultimately losing faith in the Dharma.
Absolutely,
so, Where is that at?
It's very common these days.
How can you defend it? How can you defend it?
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, women these days, as they are speaking out more about it, are finding that, you know, that it's also a combination of a lack of, like you say as well, knowledge perhaps, or, you know, and so, you know, on the part of the student, maybe it's also a fault of theirs, right? That they haven't really studied or, you know, really looked into this properly either. You know, it's not necessarily just the fault of the Lama. But anyway, so moving on in a sort of more positive vein then, So how do you think women can move forward with this, break free of these sort of patriarchal and sort of objectifying attitudes? What would you recommend sort of women to do to ensure that they
Well,
don't?
I mean, I think one thing is Taisuthu Rinpoche said that Westerners are too naive and they shouldn't believe everything they're
No,
told.
enough said on that. Yeah.
And I think that that's very true.
Yes.
And also, the one thing with women nowadays,
Yes.
compared with traditionally, is that women are well educated. And really, they should rely more, they shouldn't always hand over all their authority to the other side. They
Yes.
should have their own integrity. And if they feel a red light flashing, they should listen to that red light and not push it aside.
Yeah, and you know, I think also, you know, I think you also mentioned, I heard something you said before, that sometimes women themselves can be their own worst enemies. They often don't support other women. They don't, they, you know, they suffer from jealousy and they don't support other women. And they're also very, like you say, maybe they don't educate themselves enough about it. So what happens, I think, is sometimes, you know, in the tradition as well, there is sort of this, what we call tokenism, right? Where women who are supported and promoted by the men in power are also often the women who aren't actually really necessarily excelling in the practice, or, you know, as scholars or translators. So some women are talking about really breaking free of all of this, and, you know, from the whole sort of male tulku tradition, and just really making it a much more female oriented, you know, particularly in the Vajrayana. What's your view on that?
Good luck. You know, you're dealing with a huge fortress, right? With all the armaments within the fort. And I think just throwing a few bows and arrows at the fort is not going to overcome the fort. This is something which has been going on for centuries and is very integrated. All the lamas and the tulkus are very interconnected with each other, and they're not about to hand over their power to anybody.
Yes.
So while I think that it's good, what women need to do is what is happening, which is more scholars, more practitioners, more teachers, and allow it just to happen without being confrontational.
Yeah.
Because in confrontation, we'll never win. But by, you know, just quietly, soft-spokenly getting through and getting their cooperation, then, you know, it can happen. Already it is happening. I mean, there are more and more women out there now, and the lamas are supporting them. You know, it's
sometimes.
Not they're
not always.
They're not confrontational.
Depends on the woman.
Well, you know, if you go along with them, then they will go along with you.
It depends on the woman and the background, and if they see her as too troublesome or something. But, you know, in terms of the, you know, leading by example, which, you know, is, I think I agree with you, it's a great way for women to move forward and to set the example, right? That this is,
well,
and
it
this
does.
is what, and this is what you've
things
done.
are changing. I mean, the Karmapa himself, when he came to our nunnery, he said, you know, he apologized, right, for the centuries when women were overlooked and neglected. And he said, sorry about that. But this is not true anymore. Now you have all the facilities, all the opportunities, study, practice, everything is given to you now. There is nothing you cannot attain right now in a female. And it's true.
Yeah.
Now you can study everything, you can practice everything is out there now. So it's up to the women to show their own innate qualities, which they certainly have.
Absolutely. And I was very inspired also by a recent quote I saw of yours, you know, and you were talking about also women not trying to emulate men, which I totally agree with. You know, the women should really stay in touch with that feminine side and their innate sort of wisdom. So
Exactly.
Yeah, because that's kind of happened, right? A lot sometimes with sort of feminism, women, well, because of the challenges and the obstacles, often feel that they have to emulate that whole style. But like you say, they don't. Right.
Or you end up like Margaret Thatcher, you know, and so, you know, that's not the way we need to go. It
Yeah,
doesn't prove anything.
exactly. And as both of us are from the UK, of course, we will know full well the legacy that Margaret Thatcher left, which again is how token women don't necessarily help other women, right? That's the thing. So
Exactly.
so moving on now then to another topic, which is you're a very passionate advocate of vegetarianism and animal welfare. So you have said on more than a few occasions that you're a vegetarian, the animals are our friends. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about that, and when did you decide to become a vegetarian?
Well, the first time I decided to be a vegetarian was when I took up yoga when I was 15. And my mother and I tried for about 1 year to be vegetarian in London, but it was so difficult in those days. That was probably in the 50s, late 50s. I mean, we just didn't know what to eat because, as you know, the English diet depends on what did you eat yesterday, or pork chop, or, you know, beef, or whatever, you know. Take that away, and all you got is potatoes and cabbage. So we really ran out of inspiration what to eat. But then when I came to India, of course, my Lama insisted that I ate meat because otherwise I would get weak. But then when I left and went to stay by myself, then I immediately became vegetarian. It is, I have to say, with all truth, that it is to me a great puzzlement how the Tibetans, who have been in India now 60 years, India, the vegetarian capital of the world, are still so addicted to meat. And I find it totally puzzling because on the one hand, they're talking about all mother sentient beings and bodhicitta and may all living beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. And yet they sit down to meet Momo without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
And they
Yes.
will not give it up.
Well, unfortunately, I have to agree with you on that, and as many people will who've lived in India for a long time. So, I wrote about this also recently about why is it potentially why Tibetans, because certainly there are many great Tibetan Buddhist masters, as you know, including even ones today, like the 17th Karmapa, who is a very strict and, very passionate advocate of vegetarianism. Other lineage lamas are as well, within Drukpa Kagyu, within the
yeah. And nunneries.
And
nunneries.
Yeah,
most
exactly.
nunneries are vegetarian.
Right. So, but then there is this kind of, and now there was a very interesting paper I read recently by a Tibetan from Tibet who, says that, of all the lineages, actually the Gelugpa were the only one who ever really justified eating slaughtered animals. So it may be controversial to some, but this may be potentially a reason why Tibetans feel that it's okay to eat meat for health reasons, is because the 14th Dalai Lama does, right? Whereas actually the Buddha never said even you could eat meat for health reasons. It doesn't say that. He never said that. So this is a potential reason. But what's your, why do you think there's that disconnect? And also with the environment as well. Obviously, it's a major issue in environmentalism, the mass slaughter industry, and its impact on the planet.
Yeah.
Why do you think there is that sort of disconnect then between, I'm a Buddhist, and yet, like you say, every day people are just going out and buying freshly slaughtered meat, especially in India, right?
No, I mean, as I say, to my mind, it is just such an interesting example of innate hypocrisy, because even if you mention it, they just laugh. I mean, when I first took the Bodhisattva vow, a long Bodhisattva vow, took about 2 or 3 hours from a very high Lama, I won't say who, to celebrate that, we ate meat momos. And they couldn't see the connection.
Did you point it out to them at the time?
I did, and they laughed.
Oh, they laughed. Okay.
I mean, but they just couldn't make that, well, it seems so obvious to us.
Yes.
They just didn't see it.
Yeah, I mean, I had a similar experience when I went to the 2007 Kagyu Monlam, the 17th Karmapa. It told everyone not to eat meat, certainly in the monasteries. And afterwards, I saw then many Kagyu monastics in the restaurants still eating meat, which again, you know, that was right after that teaching. And lay people as well, who were also, you know, so there you go. What is that about? So again, is that to do with just human nature, or is it sort of
they're getting better, Adele. I mean, our monastery, for example, used to, when we had picnics, always serve most of the dishes were meat. Now none of the dishes are meat. And they are actually vegetarian, at least within the monastery. What they do outside, you can't say. But within the monastery, nowadays, they are all vegetarian. Our nunnery, right from the beginning, the nun said, we want a vegetarian nunnery. And I said, well, that's how it's going to be anyway. So good that you want that. But they're not Tibetan. Mostly they're from the Himalayan regions.
Yeah.
So what to say, why 50 years later they still haven't gotten the lamas. It's not even so much the monks, it's the lamas themselves. And if your lama is vegetarian, you'll be vegetarian. If your lama eats meat, you'll eat meat. All we like sheep. Everybody will do whatever the lama does. If the lama drinks, you'll drink. If the lama is no drinking, you won't drink. I mean,
well, one would hope so, but unfortunately, as I said, even when the 17th Karmapa gave a very clear teaching on it, not just once, but twice at the Monlam, still after that, he even said that it would be a threat to his long life. Still after that, people still ate it, even though he is a publicly well known as a vegetarian. So yes, it is very puzzling. Now, let's move on to sort of towards the future now. And by the way, you're 80 years old now, right? Is that right? You turned 80 this year?
Yep.
Well, all I can say is, and I'm sure people who will listen to this is wow, because your energy and your passion for these subjects is really still very, very, inspiring and wonderful.
Well, keep our fingers crossed. The generation is there.
Well, it's an inspiration indeed. And all I can say is I certainly hope at that age I am even closely approximating, where you're at there. So now in 2008, you got the title Jetsima from the 12th Gyawan Drukpa. So how was that? I mean, what was the sort of whole procedure of that, and how did you feel about that when that happened?
Well, when I heard rumors that this is what the Gyawan Drukpa, who's the head of the Drukpa Kagyu tradition, and he lives in his nunnery, let us not forget. He does not live in his monastery. He has a large monastery in Darjeeling. He doesn't live there. He lives with his nuns up in Nepal. So he's one lama, and they're the Kung Fu nuns. They are well known for their Kung Fu. He's very much into female empowerment and teaches them himself, which is why he stays there. Anyway, I heard the rumor that he was going to bestow this Jetsuma title, and so I was completely horrified and was working out in my mind letters to very politely decline the honor. But then, but he hadn't written to me, so I couldn't decline it before I heard from him. So I was waiting for him to say something. And meantime, I was getting letters from all over, people saying how wonderful that was, how empowered they felt as women that I was getting this title. So then I came to recognize it wasn't about me. It was about women in general, and for the nuns especially. And so therefore, when he finally wrote and said, I want to do this, I said, okay. And it was a very beautiful ceremony. It happened to be on his birthday. So there was, thousands of people were there. And also friends of mine from all around the world, which to my surprise, all came to Nepal. It was in the nunnery in Nepal. And His Holiness is very, very kind. and especially concerned about the uplift of women and nuns. So it was a very auspicious occasion, actually.
Yeah.
But I thought nobody will ever, everybody calls me Anila. Nobody will ever get used to a mouthful like Jetsuma. And I was really, really surprised how everybody switched immediately.
Well, yes, I would certainly call you Jetsuma, and well deservedly too, might I add. Now, in terms of the future, then, what are the future plans then? Sort of, you know, are you thinking about the future, for example, with the nunnery and?
Well, you know, our immediate future is that our 4 nun teachers who are graduate nuns are about to become Kenmo, which in Kenmo being the female Kempo and the Kaju equivalent of a Geshe. So Kamta Rinpoche is going to bestow the Kenmo degree on them quite soon. He's been in retreat, but we have to find out when he's going to do that. So that's one thing. Secondly, of course, we do have these nuns in long-term retreat being taught by our top dens. Some of them have done now nearly 15 years of retreat. And I would like to see when they're going to be officially recognized as Tokdenma. And thirdly, at the moment, the principal of our Tashi John Kampaka Monastic College, the Shedra, he is currently coming every day to the nunnery to go through the monastic rules of the Gelongma Bhikshuni with the nuns.
Wonderful.
With the aspiration that they will then get enough courage to go forward and take the ordination. So yes. we felt it was good if they, you know, you hear there are 364 rules, and then you think, oh my goodness, I'll never be able to keep all those rules. Yes. So we thought it would be a good idea if they knew what the rules were. And so this Kempo is coming every day very kindly and teaching for about 2 hours every day, going through the rules.
So do you see a female leading the nunnery? You know, when you you know, is that your vision? Yeah.
No, I told the nuns.
I wasn't going to say, I wasn't going to use that expression.
No, I told the nuns, the senior nuns. I mean, one thing is everything in the nunnery, all the finances and everything is in the hands of the DGL Trust.
Right.
It's not in my name. It's in the name of the trust. And most of the trust members are nuns.
Right. And so
and I have said to the nuns,
at the leader, taking it on a leadership level.
Absolutely. I said to the nuns, if you dare, when I go, if I go tomorrow and you hand it over to the monks, the lamas in Tashi-John, I will come back and haunt you. Because absolutely, this is your nunnery and you have to run it, which when I'm away, which used to happen a lot, they manage perfectly well. I mean, they hardly let that gone. Yes. I mean, they know what to do. They know, you know, everything. They are very, very organized and very harmoniously working together to keep the nunnery running. So they don't need me at all.
Well, I find that hard to believe. Your energy and your inspiration, I'm sure, is a huge driving force there. And so not easily replaceable, if at all, actually, I would say. Now, just to end then, because if you don't mind, I'd just like to ask you, you know, I mean, you mentioned Buddha nature as a kind of a really important teaching, you know, within us all. So I wanted just to ask you, you know, for people who are listening, you know, if you could sort of say one thing which you would say is kind of the essence of Buddhism for you, or the sort of benefit of being a Buddhist practitioner, or the Buddhist philosophy, what would that be? In a nutshell, obviously not hard.
I think that the Buddha, for example, didn't just tell us to be kind. He gave us methods and techniques for how to cultivate kindness. And all these qualities of the heart, he showed us how to do that, how to transform our hearts, because our essential nature is perfect, which is what I started with as a little girl. Right, that we are all perfect and we have lost sight of who we really are. And the Buddha said, yes, we are actually completely the fullness of wisdom and compassion. We just have to recognize that. And he showed us how to do it. And I
Yes.
think that's the great glory, even if you're not a Buddhist, the techniques for cultivating these qualities of the heart and mind are so exemplary for everybody, whether or not you accept the rest of Buddhist philosophy or not.
Yes, exactly. And what about sort of the view of emptiness then, or the wisdom aspect? Obviously, you know, it's very much associated with women and the female. Um, what would you say about that? And because that's obviously
Well, I
something.
think the problem is that we can intellectually understand it and have very subtle intellectual recognition, but that is not emptiness.
Mhm.
That's still conceptual thinking. And to go beyond the conceptual thinking mind to the non-dualistic pure consciousness, that's the challenge. When we do that, we are emptiness. We don't have to think about it. We become it.
Yes. And that's where I guess the sort of Vajrayana and the deity practice is so important, right? It kind of, would you say, it's putting people in contact with that very much inner essence, the perfection.
Well, I think one thing, Adele, that we have to remember is, for example, in practices like Tummo, in inner heat meditation, etc., you have everybody, including all the guys, visualizing themselves as a naked female.
Vajrayogini.
Yes. And that's because the female body is the most perfect for doing the Anuttara Yoga Tantra.
Exactly. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you again. And, you know, as I've said before, you know, you're like an emanation of Vajrayogini herself, I would say. Your energy is incredible. And, you know, we all, you know, thank you so much for everything you're doing and everything you've done. Such a remarkable legacy that you've left to not only the Tibetan Buddhist world, but to the Buddhist world as a whole. So much appreciation and respect to you, Jetsamala. And thank you,
Adele. Thank you, Adele. And good
beautiful
luck with all
podcast
your
interview.
projects and your aspirations. May they be fulfilled within this very lifetime.
Thank you,
As
Jetsamala.
soon as possible.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much.
You might be.